Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how to unlock the potential of the four-generation workplace. Today we have Kelly Riggs with us, founder, president, and chief sales officer of the Business Locker Room. In this webinar, based on his latest book of the same title, Kelly is going to educate us on this interesting and challenging issue facing all of our organizations. I also want to remind you that Kelly will be speaking at our Fall Sales Conference on September 19th. He will be hosting a workshop entitled Winning Business in the Modern Sales Environment. So if you haven't registered yet for the sales conference, make sure to do so soon as we are pretty much reaching capacity. My name is Dolores Alonzo. I'm the VP of Membership here at FPSA. The webinar is being recorded, so you and any of your colleagues will have access to it in the members only section of the FPSA website after today, and the slides are also included as an attachment for your reference. So before I pass this over to Kelly, just want to cover a few housekeeping items. All attendees are muted by default, but you have the opportunity to submit text questions to Kelly today by just typing them in the questions pane of the control panel. So send them on in, and I'll pass them on to Kelly at the end of the webinar. So thanks again for your time today, and we'll get started. Kelly, give me 1 second. Let me pass the controls over to you. You want to give it a try, Kelly, and see if you can switch them?
No luck.
No luck? Okay.
No luck.
We'll try one more time. Let's see.
It says I am viewing your screen, so.
Okay. How about now?
Can you see my mouse moving around?
I do.
Well, let's see. Well, I don't know what the deal is. We did this once and it was perfect. We had no problems.
We can resort to me flipping.
Okay, I got it. We're good. Yeah, right there. Okay, we're good to go.
Okay.
I think that's right. Let me see if that's me. Yeah, that's me. Okay. Hey, welcome everybody. Sorry to get started on a slow beat there, but we'll make a lot of progress. We're going to talk about the leadership dilemma, how to unlock the potential of the four-generation workplace. A dozen years ago, when I first founded my company, some of the first calls I got were from people who said, "Hey, can you help us learn how to manage these millennials?" And I'm like, "Well, of course." Except that it's not a secret potion or a magic pill or anything like that. In fact, the challenge is not really with the millennials, it's with the leaders. And so we want to talk about that. And if you're a boomer and you're listening in, don't decide to turn the webinar off because I said the problem was with you. I will explain, and we will also have some fun at the expense of the millennials as well. And we'll talk about all the generations in the workplace. So let's get started. You know, it really comes down to some perceptions that we have. You may recall that Mark Zuckerberg appeared before Congress recently, and he was asked by Senator Orrin Hatch, "Hey, how do you guys make money exactly? How do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?" Zuckerberg did crack a smile, and he thought that was interesting that the guys in Congress have no idea how Facebook makes money. It was even better, this question from Senator Lindsey Graham: "Is Twitter the same as what you guys do? Are you Facebook, Twitter, is that the same thing?" And so, you know, boomers, you have to put yourself in the position of millennials when all of these things are happening in terms of digital technology and social media, and all these things are going as quickly as they are and advancing like they are. And seemingly, you as a boomer manager, a leader, have no idea what's going on. And that is way more often than we might be willing to admit. However, if we're going to be fair, millennials, let's pick on you a little bit. There was a New York Times article that said, what happens when millennials run the workplace, which is a really interesting concept, and boomers are all picking themselves up out of their chairs right now. But what happens when millennials run the workplace? Well, as it turns out, they were telling a story about Chris Altchek, who's the CEO of a company called MIC in New York City. And the story that they were relating had to do with the fact that MIC happens to be a company founded by a millennial, Chris, and run by millennials, for millennials, and it's a communication media company. And so Chris shared the story that one of his millennial employees came into the office and said, listen, there's been a death in our family, and I really need to go to the wake, and I need to support the family and those kinds of things. And he said, absolutely. I mean, what would one millennial, compassionate millennial, say to another? Absolutely, no problems, totally get it. See, here's the issue. There was no death in the family. In fact, the employee in question, by the way, you can find this on the internet. You can Google it and find it. But according to Chris, what he found out, because the person blogged about it, this guy just wanted to take off a week and go build a treehouse. Yeah, I mean, you can't make that up. He needed time away. Work was too hard. He had to decompress, and so he lied to the boss and told him that he needed some compassion, and the boss showed it to him, and he went and built a treehouse so he could, I don't know, find his childhood or something. And so, interestingly enough, this millennial CEO was about as unhappy as any boomer CEO would be. So listen, there's plenty of anecdotal stories to go around. There's plenty of perceptions to go around, and we're going to talk about a bunch of those. Let's start by defining that 4-generation workplace. Actually, if you want to be completely accurate, there's 5 generations potentially in the workplace. There are still a silent generation, those born before 46 working, not very many, but there are some. Boomers, of whom there were originally 76 million, born between 46 and 65. I'm one of those. Gen X, 55 million. Raise your hand if you're Gen X. No, I can't see you raising your hand, but for the purposes of this discussion, we don't care about you. No, I'm teasing. Actually, all of the angst seems to be between boomers and millennials. But if you remember back, boomers, when Gen X first appeared on the scene, we thought, oh my gosh, it's the Gen Xers that are going to ruin the country. But then they were followed very quickly by millennials who were born in 81, according to Pew Research Center, up to 98. And there has been more written and more said about and more research done on millennials than any generation in the history of the world. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's social media and digital technology allows us to do that. Post millennials, they have a name now. They're called Gen Z. Go figure. Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z is next. I have no idea what the next generation is going to be, Gen AA or something. Anyway, post millennials, Gen Z are just now coming into the workplace. So as of 2018, they're about 20 years old, and some of those are leaking into the workplace. Many are seeking out safe spaces and trying to find college degrees. And no, I'm not kidding about that. If you watch the news, you'll know that's true. So this is 5 generations in the workplace. But let's look at millennials. They have now become the largest generation in the workplace. Boomers are retiring en masse. Gen X's have stayed flat, but millennials now, yep, they're the majority. They dominate the workplace. So they're here to stay, boomers. Get over it. It is what it is. So we have to learn not only to lead them, but in many cases now, quite a few cases, as it turns out, millennials are now the boss. And it's a really interesting dynamic when a millennial is the manager of a boomer or a Gen X. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. By the way, just as an aside, they're actually now, researchers are saying that millennials sort of divide up into 2 groups. There's early millennials and late millennials. Those born between 81 and say about mid to late 90s are called early millennials and late millennials. And the distinction between them is when the smartphone really came into vogue. It really began to impact the workplace and the millennials as well. Today's millennial, today's Gen Z really, and late millennials, they came out of the womb texting about it. They were born with a smartphone. So there are some idealistic differences between early and late millennials, and many early millennials actually relate a little bit more to Gen Xers or even boomers, depending on part of the country they grew up in and the parents they had and so forth. So it's not as cut and dried as we like to say it. And one thing we absolutely cannot do, boomers, is to place an entire generation into a bucket and generalize that entire generation. That's That doesn't work with gender. It doesn't work with religion or sexual preference or anything else. Certainly doesn't work with what generation you're in. So you want to keep those things in mind. All right. If I can get this to work again. It appears that I have lost control of, so I need to go forward, Dolores, if you will. There we go. The thing to know and to start with, and this will make the millennial viewer happy, millennials are not the problem. In fact, the problem is change. And the sooner we decide and figure out that the problem is not the millennials, it's not the generation, it's not the person, the problem is different, quote unquote, the problem is the need to change, the sooner we get there. When we came into the workplace, boomers, I don't think you remember very well, but we were different too. And our older generation in the workplace thought we were going to be the end of the world. And then, of course, boomers thought Gen X was going to be the end of the world. And we transferred that to Gen Z. The differences are what make the problems. They're raised differently. They have different perspectives. They see the world differently. You know, and as my son likes to say, of course, we wrote the book Counter Mentor Leadership, How to Unlock the Potential of the Fourth Generation Workplace. My 31-year-old millennial son loves to remind me, hey, if there's anything wrong with us, Pops, you're the one that raised us. And that's true. And it tends to stop a lot of boomers in their tracks because we are well aware of the term helicopter parents. Helicopter parents have created a lot of the problems that we see in millennials because they hover over their millennial kids and they give them everything, and they've raised them on digital technology. They've let them have a cell phone, which, by the way, the research hitting the airwaves now indicates that that's psychologically and neurologically creating a lot of problems for kids. But we didn't allow them to fail, and we allowed them to communicate via text. We didn't teach them the skills of interpersonal relationships. And we were the ones that gave them 7th place trophies and ribbons. And we're the ones that went to school when they got in trouble and said, oh, no, not my Johnny. He could not do anything like that. I'll sue you, right? So before we place all of the problem, you know, at the feet of the millennial generation, maybe we should look in the mirror. But the real problem is simply that they're different, that change, and we have to be able to adjust to it. We begin to think about what is important to millennials. This becomes critical because we can't respond to, interact with, and value millennials until we know what's important to them and what has been a part of their lives. If you look dead square in the middle at this word cloud, respect is a very big part of who they are. But so is feedback and connection and community. Purpose is a huge driver. Collaboration and the freedom to make choices. For all of their lives, they have been allowed to make choices. They've been involved. Have been able to have input through collaboration. In college now, kids work together in joint projects far more than the old school idea of, you know, studying, taking notes, and taking an individual test. And one thing about millennials, they want to make an impact. The one idea here that I need you to focus on that we'll come back to is this idea of feedback. Boomers, when we were young, we sought feedback too, and we were told to do our jobs. We were told that if we needed to know something, we would be told, and we don't need feedback. We just need to close our mouths and get our work done. And so when we would ask, you know, if a boomer parent or boss told us what to do, we would say, why? We would ask why, you know, what's going on? And they would say, it's already gotten out of your mouth because I said so. Well, we think that's a kid problem. It's not a kid problem. It's a human psychology problem. People do their best work when they understand why, when they know what the purpose is behind what they're doing, when they get feedback that tells them how they're doing and what they need to change. Many boomer managers, having been raised a certain way, continue to manage that specific way, and they not only don't provide purpose, they don't provide the feedback, they don't allow people the freedom to make choices, and on and on. But although they are different, a lot of the things that they have as needs in the workplace are not outrageous. They're just not things we grew up with, or we, you know, were never given. But if you look carefully, these are the needs of all humans. All humans want to have respect and be connected and be able to develop their careers and so forth and so on. But the big one in the middle is respect for a reason. And we'll come back to that in just a moment. All right. So let's also note for our millennial watchers, boomers aren't the problem either. No, they're really not. Boomers aren't the problem. The problem is the style and method of leadership that they use. And to be quite fair, millennials, they've been taught this. It is old school. In fact, we'll talk about what we call boomers and millennials. Instead of making it about generation, we make it about groups, the boss and the kids. The boss is the boomer old school supervisor, and we're much more focused on the idea of boomers as being old school. And what is old school? I do it because I said so. If I want something done right, I'll do it myself. If I need your opinion, I'll ask for it. I'm going to tell you what to do. Sit down, be quiet. I'll be the boss. I'll be the leader. You do what you're told. I'll make the decisions. I'll solve the problems. And after you pay your dues and work 5, 8, 10 years and climb your way up the ladder and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, then we'll think about promoting you. And if you're lucky, we'll give you a raise or two along the way. Well, boomers, got bad news for you. That does not fly. It's interesting that millennials have had on average about 5 jobs in the first 10 years of their career, and they have no compunction whatsoever moving on to the next job. If they can't find purpose and community and collaboration and respect and feedback, if they can't find those things, they don't have a problem going somewhere else. We wouldn't change jobs because we did not want the label job hopper, because getting that label was almost a death sentence to your career. Couldn't get hired, couldn't get the next job. So we would sit and put up with this nonsense because we needed to protect our future. Millennials are like, hey, dude, I don't care. Okay, if you can't help me, I'll go somewhere where I can. And in this day and age, we're not talking about industrial America. We're not talking about the late 1800s and the early 1900s. We're talking about a knowledge economy. We're talking about people who can do more on digital technology before 10 in the morning at Starbucks on a smartphone than many of us can do sitting in that seat all day long. So the real problem is not generational. In fact, I want to leave you with this. If you're taking notes, write this down. Leadership is not generational. It's relational. And I stop there and pause because I want you to write it down. Leadership is not generational. It's relational. On the other hand, I will admit straight up, if you want to be a micromanager, if you want to be a tyrant, if you want to continue to be old school, you can be successful. I could name you a lot of managers, a lot of companies who have been successful as tyrants, as micromanagers. But here's the problem. You're going to get a lot of turnover. You're never going to attract the best talent because people don't like to be treated that way. You're going to get ulcers, and you never get to take a vacation unless you take along your iPad and 2 cell phones and check in once a day. You know it, and I know it. That's not our objective in the leadership dilemma and using counter-mentor leadership. Our objective is to create a team of high-performance employees who make us better as a sum of the parts than they would be individually. But you first have to come to the realization. It's not about the millennial. It's not about the boomer. It's about change and adapting to change. And it's about taking away all of those old school management types of ideas. What do boomers want, millennials? There you go. Here's what we want. We want respect, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. I mean, we wrote a song about it. Well, Aretha Franklin did anyway. But just a little respect. Here's the thing. Boomers and millennials define respect differently. For me, raised by silent generation parents, as a boomer, I was taught that you respect the title, you respect the position. That coach, that teacher, that policeman, that fireman, your boss, they deserve your respect, and you better well show it. Millennials have not been raised that way. They have been raised that respect is how they're treated. And so they will respect you if you first treat them well. And so it leads us to conversations in the workplace that sound like this. I don't like my boss. He doesn't respect me. How so? Well, he doesn't treat me right. He doesn't give me good feedback. He doesn't treat me as an equal. He doesn't respect me. I'm sure not going to respect him. And we get people who get off on the wrong foot right away. We'll come back to this, by the way, this whole concept later. I'll tell you how to solve this problem. But we get off on the wrong foot because the boomer manager expects to be respected out of the chute. I liked you enough to hire you. I believe in you enough to give you that job and to afford you the position. I pay you, for crying out loud. Can't you respect me? The millennial says, okay, I'm going to come into this job, and if you earn my respect, I'll give it to you. But until then, we'll see. And so immediately we get off on the wrong foot. Why? Change. Much different perspectives, much different understandings of the world. Let's talk about what leadership looks like and where we're going to go with counter mentor leadership. The individual that you're looking at with her back to you is Mary Whipple. Mary Whipple is what we refer to as, if you know anything about rowing crew, you'll know the answer to this. Many people don't know anything about crew. Mary Whipple is what's called a coxswain. It doesn't pronounce like it looks. She's a coxswain. It translates literally to boat servant. Mary Whipple is about 105 pounds soaking wet. She goes about 5'1". If you'll look at the people rowing the boat behind her, those ladies average about 5'7" and about 170 pounds, and they are strong. You row a boat around all day long, every day for long periods of time, and you develop enormous leg strength, back strength, shoulder strength. They're incredibly strong. Mary Whipple is a coxswain. She was a coxswain in college. She was for the USA World Team. She was in the Olympics as well, and she was enormously successful. Collegiate champion in 01 and 02. Silver in the Olympics and gold twice in the Olympics in 4, 8, and 12. World champion 4 times. You know what's interesting about Mary Whipple? She never puts an oar in the water. She doesn't row. She's the boat servant. And yet she has been able to win consistently no matter who's in the boat rowing. And there's something about her as a leader that transforms people into better performers. And they did a lengthy expose on her in the New York Times. And in that article, it said this: like a symphony conductor, she has the ability to get 8 strong women all working together. When you lock into that, the power is something you cannot even quantify. You know what the boat servant does? They're responsible for direction. She controls the rudder. And one small deviation in that rudder can mean the difference in 6 to 8 yards of length at the end. And many times races are won by that length of a boat. She also dictates cadence. She dictates what's going on around her. She tells everybody what's happening, where the other boats are. And importantly, she's the person that provides inspiration. The talk, the encouragement, the things that makes people want to do better than they can do without that. And she wins consistently. We, of course, love the whole notion of the leader as a symphony conductor because that's what conductors do. They lead an orchestra to produce a product, a result, in this case, a symphony, and yet they don't play an instrument. Yet everybody knows that symphony conductor is an amazing musician, incredibly talented, capable of playing first chair at one and sometimes more than one of the people that you see in this illustration. But that symphony conductor doesn't go, hey, you know what? I'm not really getting what I need out of that first chair violin. I'm going to jump in and do this while we're playing. They are responsible for pace, for direction, for the final outcome, but they don't play a single instrument. This is what leadership really looks like. Whether you talk about a sports analogy or you talk about a music analogy, if you talk about men, woman, doesn't matter if they're rowing crew, if they're leading a work team. What we typically look like, though, the boomer manager, is we typically look like this. When we get to work, we pile on the firefighting equipment and we start putting out fires. We start solving problems. We start making decisions. And we are truly in reactive mode regularly. In fact, we typically don't get a lot of things done that need to be done because we're in that mode of putting out fires, solving problems, making decisions. And you say, well, yeah, I mean, that's what leaders do. No, they don't. They don't have to. Not if you know how to lead effectively, like a boat servant, like a symphony conductor. And that's what we're going to begin to talk about. The question is, how do you go from the picture on the left to the picture on the right? How do you make that transition from reactionary to proactive conductor and truly create a team that is greater than just you by yourself? Let's start with getting an idea of how you define leadership. You know what's really interesting about leadership? Go look up a definition. I've had groups of people in the room, groups of people I've spoken to say, pull out a pen and paper. I want you to write down your definition of leadership. And it's amazing how many different definitions you get, how many nuances. I read a piece, and we talk about it in Counter Mentor Leadership, the book. I read a piece by a guy who said, you know, it dawned on me that I've been writing about leadership for a very long time. I've never even defined it. There's no commonly accepted definition. People have all kinds of ideas, and they will they'll commonly define leadership by saying, you know, it's the leading people. You know, leadership is leading people. Oh, okay, so you define the word by using the word. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The simplest definition ever is the one provided by John Maxwell, Ken Blanchard, Stephen Covey. Leadership is influence. You can't lead someone you cannot influence. So we'll talk more about that. But the definition we use in the workplace when we're training people is the one you see here. It is the art and the science of getting things done through other people. You know what's really interesting is the reason we promote people to leadership. Why do we promote people to leader, to manager? We typically look around the room and look at the person who's great at what? Getting things done. Man, we love doers. And when people are good at getting things done, we can't promote them to leader fast enough. But getting things done and getting things done through other people are two different skill sets. But we promote you for getting things done. What is your expectation? Hey, I know more than everyone else. I'm better at it than everyone else. That's what they pay me to do now as the quote unquote manager, and really are what you are as a leader. Hey, if people report to you, you're a leader. Game over. It doesn't matter how you define it. You are responsible for the development and growth and direction of people. You're their leader. But we don't pay you to get things done anymore. We pay you to get things done through other people. And most people have never, ever received any training. What they do is lead the way they've always been taught. Unfortunately, the way they've been taught is not good. Let me share some research with you. This is really eye-opening. If you're a note taker, write some of these things down because these are killer. All right. Harvard Business Review reported on an extremely large survey sample, over 60,000 employees, and they asked them, is your manager focused on results or are they focused on people? And they said, all right. So now, second question, would you consider your boss to be a good leader? Those who were results focused on results, 1 out of 8, 14%, I'm sorry, 1 out of 7, 14% were considered to be good leaders. 14%. So you get promoted for that results focus. You're good at getting things done. And according to a very large sampling, about 14% of the time you'll be considered to be a good leader. Now, let's switch gears. For those who said, my boss is a people person and they're really great with people, they have a people focus. Write down on a piece of paper in front of you, what percentage of them were considered to be good leaders? I'll give you a second. Think about it. What do you think? 50%? 70%? Yeah, it's pretty close. The answer, 12%. Yeah, 12%. When I first read that, I was shocked. I was like, oh, hang on a second. You're killing me here, Smalls. I mean, I thought if you're a people person, you know, you're going to be a better leader. But it gets interesting. For those leaders who are considered to be both results focused and people focused, which many leaders think you can't be. But one of the guiding principles of leadership is you can be demanding, you can be results focused, and you can be empathetic. You can be people focused at the same time. Absolutely, you can be. In fact, you must be. And here's why. For those who were considered to be both, they were considered to be a good leader 74% of the time. That's crazy numbers. They went from 14 and 12 to 3 out of 4 people, 74%. Now, if you think about it, most of you got promoted because you're good at getting things done. You've got the results focus handled. What you've got to learn is the people or empathy side, and you've got to learn to be both at the same time. And in fact, you have to be if you're going to be successful. Oh, by the way, one last note. How many leaders were considered to be both results focused and people focused? The answer, 1%. That's right, 1%. That's how rare good leaders are. All right, so learning how to manage quote unquote millennials is not the answer. In fact, the answer we believe is bound up in our counter leadership methodology, COUNTER, and you can read more about it in the book, Counter Mentor Leadership. We're going to talk about a couple of those pieces today. Before we get there, let's talk about some challenges, leadership challenges that did not even exist 15 to 20 years ago. In fact, leadership is not only difficult, it's far more difficult today than it ever has been. This is where it gets crazy. Let's talk about 3 new leadership challenges. Number 1, of course, is distraction. Distraction is an enormous problem at work. Now, it's always been a problem at work, but 20 years, if you ask people what the primary distraction was, if we did a survey about it, the primary distractions were phone calls and meetings and people dropping in unannounced. Now distractions are all over the place. It's email, it's text, it's social media, and it's meetings, and it's people dropping in unannounced, and it's all of the software that grabs our attention and is always on, always open. In fact, if you really want to know the truth, we have become a society of people addicted to technology. And the research bears that out. Absolutely true. When your telephone dings because you got a new message, or somebody just liked your Facebook post, or you got a new text, the research is very clear that you're like Pavlov's dog. You dump dopamine into your system right now and you can't stand it. You have got to get a reward. You've got to see who it is. Did you get another like? Who it could be a customer, you know. It could be, I never know who's on the other side of that text or that email. People can't resist. Those distractions exist in the workplace. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in a minute, share some data with you that's mind-boggling. Number 2 is complexity. Everything about the workforce is more complex. Everything about your product, your service is more complex. The way you service it, maintain it, the way you actually respond to customers is complex, way more than 15 years ago. In fact, the new truism, the new reality in the workplaces now is what we would call decentralized complexity. You can't serve a customer by yourself. Many times there are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 touch points for customers inside of your workforce, which means no, you can't do it by yourself. You can't make all the decisions. You can't solve all the problems, and you can't deal with every single customer. So if you don't lead and train and develop your people effectively, you're going to lose performance automatically. The third thing, well, it's become your reality every day, and is change. But it's not just a change, it's waves of change. And these waves of consistent change also have a physiological and psychological impact on your employees. In fact, there's something now that we've learned about people who are subjected to consistent change. What often looks like their resistance to your change, according to Chip and Dan Heath in their excellent book called Switch, is actually exhaustion. You ever get to the end of a day, get to the middle of the afternoon, and you've been dealing with issues and problems and change and all of the things that are thrown at you all day long, and you throw up your hands and go, that's it, that's all I got, I'm done, not another thing today. It's not resistance, it's exhaustion. Willpower is an exhaustible resource. That is a fact. And all 3 of these things impact a lot of different things, and willpower is one of those. Let's start talking about distractions. Average millennial, according to the research, checks their cell phone, a minimum 150 times a day. I don't believe that at all. I think that number is incredibly low. But here's the bad news, boomers. It's not just millennials. In fact, this number applies to Gen X and boomers as well. We are indeed addicted to our phones. It's gotten so bad that it's lead us to post signs now that look like this. In case of fire, exit the building before you start tweeting about it. Yeah, you've seen the YouTube videos, people walking down the street and they step in front of traffic and get injured. They step into holes, they run into poles, they do all of these things. And it's because we are so absolutely glued to our cell phones. It's unbelievable. You know what the really bad thing is? A good friend of mine is named Kurt Steinhorst. He's called a distraction expert. This is what he writes about. It's what his area of expertise is. You can find him at kurtsteinhorst.com. This is an interesting visual. He said this was actually an accident. They captured it. But we are so glued to our cell phones, many times we don't see the real crises around us. And that's what this is intended. In today's day and age, maybe not the best graphic, but it's what it's intended to show. According to Kurt Steinhorst, the research tells us something very, very incredible, and that is this: the average employee is interrupted in the workplace. They are distracted and interrupted in the workplace every 3 minutes. Every 3 minutes. That's not even the bad number, folks. It gets worse. According to the data, it takes an average of 23 minutes to get back on task. Yeah, it looks something like this. You're banging away on your email, typing out a note to somebody, and you get interrupted. And so you take that interruption and you have a conversation, then you decide to get up, grab a cup of coffee, walk down the hall, run into a colleague, have a conversation about that big project. On the way back, your phone rings. You take that call, you get back and you look around and you go, okay, now, where was I? 23 minutes later, you get back on task, bang, 3 minutes later, happens again. Man, think about the productivity that's lost in the workplace. This is what distraction does to the workplace. Are there solutions? Yeah, there are. We can't get into them today, but you got to be aware that this is the environment that you're working in. Look at the cost of distractions. According to the research that's been done, it's as much as 11% of your people costs. It averages in lost time 2.3 days per month per employee. Yeah, that's bottom line numbers. I mean, it's a huge number when you think about it. In fact, there was a recent survey done, one of my favorite, 2014, Salary.com did a survey. Workers are wasting more time than ever in 2014. They asked employees. Now, millennials, you got to pay attention here because this was self-reported by employees. My generation knew better than to tell people things like this. All right. It's really interesting. Self-reported. How much time do you waste at work? 31% of employees admitted to wasting roughly a half an hour a day. 31% admitted to wasting roughly a full hour a day. Okay, that doesn't sound like much, but it gets worse. 16%, more than 1 in 6, are wasting, according to themselves, they are wasting up to 2 hours a day. 1 in 16, a little more, 6% waste roughly 3 hours per day. Oh yeah, it gets worse. Self-reported, keep this in mind. 2% are roughly wasting half their day, 2% 5 or more hours a day. Do you realize that 1 in 25 employees report that they waste more than 4 hours a day? 4 out of 100. I mean, that's crazy. Think about it. Now it gets worse. They told us where they're wasting the time. 3 biggest offenders of where they're spending all that time they're wasting: Google, yes, Facebook, and LinkedIn, which is probably where they're spreading their resume around, looking for a new job, boomer leader, boss, because they don't like the person they work for. Wow. Think about that. I mean, distractions are a big, big time waster. Well, I don't have time to get into the other two, which are complexity and change, but suffice it to say, you start piling them on as well, and suddenly leadership is way more difficult than even we thought it was. So what we wanted to do is to begin to think very seriously and significantly about where should leaders place their focus. And we talk about the 3 areas that leaders focus, the 3 things that leaders have to do, must do, because nobody else can do them. And if you, leader, if you're not doing them, you have a problem. Okay, first thing is you are responsible for communication. Now look, before you go, oh, wow, that's incredibly impressive, Kelly. You're telling me that I have to care about communication. Could you be any more broad or general than that? Slow down a minute there. I have yet to work in any organization in a dozen years that doesn't readily admit that they have communication problems. Let me ask you, does your company have communication issues? Shake your head up and down, because I know it's true. I've seen it over and over. You know what's interesting? I ask all the time, when are you going to solve the problem? And people look at me like I've lost my mind. What do you really solve the problem? No, no, no. I mean, communication problems just are. I mean, they're a fact of life. You don't get rid of them, folks. That's a terrible way of looking at things, because first, it's not true that you can't at least improve, that you can't do a much better job of communicating. But it also is very dangerous to have that type of attitude, because it prevents you from finding answers. We have to focus on communication, and here's why. Pay close attention. If you don't manage communication, if you don't manage the messages, your people will fill in the blanks. If you don't communicate well, they'll communicate for you. And trust me, you're not going to like it, because we tend to be negative. We tend to make poor assumptions. We tend to filter everything through a negative lens. Most people take two disparate events, and that communicates to them something that is not at all true, because you did not take the time to communicate. Number two, second very important thing we have to look at, and that is clarity. You have to provide direction. You have to define the finish line. Where are we going? What's our vision? What's our focus? You have to create strategy and planning that will get there, because employees don't do that. Now, certainly, if you're paying close attention as the boss, you can determine the finish line, the vision, and then you can pass that down and give them a subset of that and have them determine their planning and focus on a part of that that's going to get us there. But somebody's got to be responsible for direction, for clarity. And most organizations functionally are not aligned well. They're not all rowing in the same direction. Think back to Mary Whipple, the coxswain. They're not all rowing in the same direction. Why? Because the direction's not even well defined. And the people don't know what direction to row, so they're doing whatever. And of course, that relates back to communication as well. And then the third thing is that you have to be very concerned about people development. If you're not developing your people, the odds are very good they're not developing. I mean, yeah, there are a select few that through their own initiative do their own development. They pursue their own career. And boomers, oh, boss, hey, you'd love if that's all your people were about. If every person you hired was that way, you'd be a superstar. Oh, well, except you'd still want to make all the decisions and solve all the problems. But I mean, people development, remember what the definition of leadership is? The art and science of getting things done through other people. The better and the more frequently and the more consistently you develop your people, the more they can get done. Listen to me, without you. That's the holy grail of leadership. When people know where we're going, why we're going there, and they've been fully developed and empowered to get us there without me doing all the work. That's when teams perform above their individual capabilities. And that's what we want to focus on. So let's start and talk a little bit about each of those three as we begin to wind up the webinar. The first thing is communication. This is the most important thing that leaders do. It was so important for me that as a leader in the workplace, as an executive, I had a sign on my monitor, my computer monitor, that said this: did you communicate well today? Did you communicate well today? Communicating had to be understood, but did I do it well? It means I had to think through the communication. And there's a lot of trigger points that point to when and where and how to communicate. But I want to call your attention to something that we call the one-on-one management leadership cycle. In 2008, I wrote a book called One-on-One Management, What Every Great Manager Knows That You Don't. And one-on-one management is based on the premise that leadership is best done one-on-one, that you can't develop people as well in groups as you can working with them one-on-one. And to that end, we use a tool called the one-on-one meeting, what we now call, my son and I, the counter mentor one-on-one meeting, because it fits into our counter leadership model. The one-on-one management leadership cycle was something I developed to help me understand something very simple: employee engagement. If you're not familiar with employee engagement, you should be. Employee engagement is an empirical measurement, and an empirical measurement of how engaged your employees are. It is not a measurement of how talented or skilled they are or what their performance level is. It's an empirical measurement of their level of emotional commitment, their passion for the job, their belief in the company, that they enjoy and love what they do. And, they pay attention to detail. They're committed to excellence. It says nothing about their skill, but it does say how much they are engaged at work. Here's why you should care. Employee engagement for over 15 years now has been studied and connected directly to the following things: increased productivity, increased profitability, safer workplaces, less workplace turnover. In what I'm saying to you is higher levels of employee engagement mean more for you. More money, more productivity, safer workers, less turnover, which is more money. Oh, and by the way, yeah, they're better with customers too. Their customer satisfaction numbers are better. So I want to understand this thing called employee engagement, because what it says is the more engaged your employees are at work, the better work they do, the better you do everywhere. Where does engagement come from? Well, thankfully, we don't have to guess, actually. There was a book written some time ago by Lee Branham, 2007, and the title of that book was The 7 Hidden Reasons Employees Leave. The 7 Hidden Reasons Employees Leave. Might have been written in 2005. Anyway, they surveyed 19,500 employees who left their jobs, and they asked them, why did you leave? Why did you become so disengaged at work that you decided to go somewhere else? 70% of the time, listen to me now, 70% of the time, they left because of their immediate manager or supervisor. 70% of the time, people leave a company, they leave because of the person they work for. In other words, leaders drive engagement. What is leadership? It is influence. Okay, if I cannot influence you, you lose engagement. You become disengaged. According to Gallup, 2 things. Number one, roughly 2 out of 3 employees at work are not engaged, or what they call actively disengaged, which is, by the way, worse. It is a higher level of disengagement. 17% of employees, I think, or 16%, I believe it is, according to their last numbers, are what they call actively disengaged. They are toxic. These are toxic employees. They're actively trying to undermine what you're doing. Really critically important. Who controls engagement? Leaders do. In fact, that has now been validated again and again, over and over, by Gallup, which says 70% of engagement is directly impacted by leaders. So how do you earn the right to influence people? What is leadership? What is leadership a function of? The answer is this: trust. You can't lead or influence people who do not trust you. You have to build a relationship of trust with people before they are willing to allow you to lead them, before they'll listen to you. But the more they trust you, the more you lead them, the higher engagement levels they are, the better their performance is. So here we go, the Holy Grail. What creates trust? Shocker, you probably already know this. Communication. No, I'm not talking about communication, telling people what to do or writing them an email. Communication is everything you do. It's what you say, but it's what you don't say. It communicates. In fact, what you say doesn't communicate nearly as loud as what you do. And by the way, if you have a say-do gap, if you say one thing and do another, there's a gap between what you promise and what you deliver, you're going to have a trust problem. Everything you do communicates. And there are several aspects of communication, like feedback and recognition and other types of things like that, that are very important aspects of communication that impact trust. That's how important trust is, and that's why we need to understand it. Number 2, of course, the 3 things that we focus on, number 2 is clarity. And clarity, again, is about direction. One of the most important tasks of a manager, this is one of my favorite quotes of all time. Robert Townsend, former CEO of Avis. I have used this for a dozen years now, and I believe in it wholeheartedly. One of the most important tasks of a manager, a leader, is to eliminate his or her people's excuses for failure. This is such an interesting concept. Do you mean to tell me there are things that we leaders do that can eliminate some of the more common excuses for employee failure? And the answer is absolutely yes. And it is your responsibility to take those things off the table. Let's talk about what those things are. You know what the most common excuse for failure is? I didn't know. Hey man, wait a minute, I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't know you wanted it that way. I didn't know it was due on Friday. I didn't know I was supposed to do it in this, this format. I've never even been trained that way. I don't know how to do that, right? I didn't know is about knowledge. If people don't know, whose fault is it? Yeah, it's the leader's fault. But I've had leaders all the time say, well, they should have known. I mean, I would have known that. Listen, all you're doing is giving them a built-in excuse. Because when I say I didn't know, what do you say as a leader? Well, if you say, well, you should know, all you're doing is creating a conflict and a confrontation there that does not need to exist. Because I can tell you this, really simple rule of thumb. If an employee should know something, make sure they know it. That excuse comes off the table. Second most common excuse, I didn't know how. I didn't know how. Well, what is that? That's a training issue. Who's responsible for training? Yeah, you are. In fact, if you're keeping notes, let me give you 3 questions I want to have you write down real quickly, okay? And they're to prove the following point. If you have an underperforming team, it's not your team's fault. That's right, it's your fault. If you have an underperforming team, it's not your team's fault, it's your fault. And that drives some people crazy. Like, what are you talking about? I mean, I got some people that are awful. Really? Who's responsible for that? Let me ask you the 3 questions. Who hires your people? Now, I'm going to assume you do because most leaders do. I mean, there'll be exceptions. Well, I don't do it. I don't have hire fire capability. Okay, it's a little different. But let's put it in this context. Most leaders, they hire their people. You hire them. Who trains them? Yeah, you're responsible to train your people. You hire them, you train them. Who's their leader? Who's responsible to lead them? You are. And if they don't perform up to performance standards, the expectations you set, who's responsible for that? That's right, you are. You know what the big problem is in the workplace? The biggest problem that we see, managers who do not address performance issues. Big deal. Because if you don't address performance issues, not only does it create a culture that lacks accountability, it also compromises your leadership integrity. Yeah, it's a big deal. Okay, setting clear expectations, which is a critical part of what we do as managers, is actually quite simple. Most managers don't do it well at all. Here's how you do it. Number 1, you've got to make sure that the desired outcome, that expectation you're setting, you got to have that outcome very clearly defined. Exactly what does the final result look like? If you tell somebody you need a report and you need it right away, okay, that sounds clear, except that what if they print it out and you wanted the digital version, you wanted it on slides, or they send you the PowerPoint slides, you wanted it printed out in full color. I mean, it's a really simple example, but the first rule of thumb is very, very clear in terms of what that outcome looks like. Number 2, you got to define that time frame and you got to make sure that's clear as well. Do you need it done by the close of business Friday? Do you need them to start doing this immediately until it's done? And it should be done by when? You know, we're talking about changing behavior or a project delivery. Doesn't matter. Time frames got to be agreed upon. And finally, number 3, and here's the tricky part, boomers, you got to explain the why. Why? Because people don't do their best work if they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. Hey, when you were young, you asked your parents why, and they said what? Because I said so. We think, well, that's just kids. You know, that's for kids. Kids ask why. Adults shouldn't ask why. They should be smarter than that. Nope, sorry. Human psychology doesn't work that way. People want to know why. Here's the interesting thing is, a lot of times people won't agree with you. But if they understand your expectations and they know the why behind it and they've had a chance to talk about it, they can get on board even if they don't agree. Yeah, that's how it works. All right. Yeah, the interesting thing is conflict is nothing more than frustrated expectations. And if you don't set clear expectations, you are on a collision path with conflict. It's going to happen. All right. All right. Number 3, let's talk about people development. This is your 3rd role, maybe the most critical, although it's really hard to take any one of these. You take any one of these 3 out, you're going to have issues. But people development, this is what we live for as leaders. It's the thing that we do. And the thing I have to tell you about people development is you have to be intentional. That's right, leaders. You need a plan. You need a people development plan. Each of those 3 people on that screen, they have different needs. They have different motivations. They have different skill sets. You can't have a one-size-fits-all people development plan. And by the way, your training has to be intentional, not like, hey, if we can, we'll try to get you some of this kind of training. Or, hey, you need to get better at X. If you need them to get better at X, put a plan together to help them get better at X. You know what's really interesting? When you help your people get better, The loyalty that you create with your people is amazing. The engagement levels go up. And when employee engagement levels go up, the party gets started. Yeah, higher engagement levels, you make more money, you're more productive, you're better with clients, more attention to detail. But people development has to be on purpose, which means, of course, you got to take the time to figure out what each of your people need, have conversations with them about it, and put a plan together to help them get there. One final story before we end that kind of brings all of this into focus. You're looking at a picture of my youngest son a year and a half ago. He was 26 years of age at the time, I believe, maybe 25, late 25. He got hired onto the fire department after he had become an EMT and then a paramedic. He got hired on by the fire department. His first day on the job, his captain did all the standard orientation things, first day on the job, fill out your paperwork, sign your insurance papers, get all the handbooks and do all that. When they got through all of that in the afternoon, the captain sat down with him and two other brand new firefighters. He sat down and said, okay, folks, I want to tell you what I expect out of you. And he began to lay out what their very clear expectations were. And let me give you an example of that. He said, fellas, as the new guys on the block, guess what you get to do? You get to clean the bathrooms. That's right. You get to clean the toilets, boys. Congratulations. Welcome to being a fireman. So he took them into the bathroom and he took all the cleaning supplies. And while they watched, he proceeded to clean that entire bathroom by himself. He cleaned the toilets, inside, outside, top, bottom. He cleaned the floors. He cleaned the corners. He wiped down the counters and the sinks. He mopped everything up, and when he was all done with them watching, he said, now, when I say clean the bathroom, this is what I'm talking about. This is what it should look like when you're done. You will do this every single week, and he gave them the day of the week. You see the clear expectation for the result? No equivocation. No, you don't clean it the way you think clean sounds. By the way, if you've ever had teenage kids, you know that nobody agrees on what clean looks like, right? He made it clear. This is what clean looks like. This is my expectation. Here's the time frame. And then he explained why. He said, let me be very clear. If we don't do the little things right, we'll never be good at the big things. The little things are where we create discipline. Every man in this firehouse has cleaned this bathroom for at least a year by themselves or with other new people. We're all willing to do it. We all know how to do it. And you're going to learn to do exactly the same. And I expect the same level of attention to detail in the bathroom that I expect out on the trucks, out in the field, when we're saving people's lives. Simple enough. One of the really great selfless acts of pure leadership that I've ever seen up close and personal. Really, really good stuff. All right, that's going to do it. That's an introduction to the book, Counter Mentor Leadership. And we didn't talk a lot about, the specifics of millennials, the specifics of Gen X or boomers. And that's because these timeless leadership principles will make you better with any generation. Parting shot here before I look at any question is this. Write this down. Leadership is not generational. It's relational. Don't want you to forget that one. Okay. It's about becoming a better leader, not learning some trick to manipulate millennials so you can get what you want. All right, Dolores, I'll throw it back to you. We'll take some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. That was truly outstanding, really terrific insights on such an important subject that affects us all. We do not have any questions at the moment, but people may out to you offline. So I just want to thank you again, Kelly. Thank you to the attendees, and we will see you in September, okay?
Yeah, excited to see everybody at the sales conference. It's going to be good stuff.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Kelly. Really appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.